and no one,
Right.
and quite frankly, anyone who downloads 4K content
On
on their
their phone.
smartphones,
Yeah. Fact.
Yeah, I mean.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast featuring me and the usual posse of Ian and Jamie, me being Scott. Just as a reminder that if you're watching this on the website or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud and countless other platforms. Okay, this week you two once more have been going off to events that I've been sort of cunningly delegating to Jamie.
I was there too.
Oh right. Oh yeah, you were at that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna. The main event you guys all went to this week was Vodafone's big 5G launch, which is the second UK operator to do a big 5G launch event after EE. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to have a bit of an update. I think last week we were anticipating some kind of possible breakthrough between Trump and President Xi. Is that all right? I remember when I was editing the last one, you were giving me a hard time about that. But I'm sticking with Xi, so just back off. And so we'll have a look at Jinping. We'll have a look at whether there's been any updates there, if only on the correct pronunciation of his name. And then lastly, Apple's long-time head of design's cleared off, and we're just going to have a quick chat about whether Apple is sort of innovating anymore or they're just boring. Might get you involved in that, Pierre, as you're a bit of an Apple fanboy. Cool. Okay, so Vodafone. I'll hand this one to Jamie first, as he wrote an excellent piece on it. Got loads of reads that I had the privilege to edit. Tell us about the Vodafone 5G launch, Jamie.
Well, I mean, the one thing that caught my attention more than anything else was the new pricing plan, because they unveiled their pricing for subsidised handsets a couple of weeks ago and slightly undercut EE, but they've now launched a SIM-only tariff, which effectively leans on the work that Elisa, I think that's how you pronounce it, Elisa has been doing in Finland, where instead of tiering on data consumption allowances, they tier on data speed allowances.
Okay, and it's uncapped?
Completely uncapped tariffs.
There's no talk, like last week you were talking about you've got a thing that is uncapped but it has a throttling sort of threshold. Is there any talk of that, or is it totally uncapped?
Totally
unlimited. It's throttled permanently.
Right.
Yeah, it's throttled unless you're on the top
permanently
level.
because you've got speed tiers.
Yeah. Okay, so that's
so it's throttled permanently.
I'll shut up and let you carry on.
Yeah. So the bottom one is 2 megabits per second. So you've got unlimited data for the entire month, but you won't get more than 2 megabits per second at any single point. Then the second one is 10 megabits per second, and the final one is as fast as you can go in that area. So I mean that could be, if you're at a quiet 5G cell site, it might be a gigabit. If you're at a congested 5G cell site, it might be 100 megabits per second. If you're on a high-speed 4G area, it could be 25, 30, 40, however much. Yeah. It's the fastest speed available
and
for that
totally
area.
Uncapped.
Totally uncapped.
Do you know off the top of your head what the damage is for that super-duper tariff?
23, 26 and £30 a month for each of the tiers.
And that's SIM only?
SIM only.
Okay.
So you have to...
That's not that bad, actually, 30 for
it's good.
unlimited. Yeah.
I think it's good, but the thing is, I mean, we were talking about this after the show, and there's no applications out there that require these high speeds or big enough downloads that you can actually see the speeds, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if I downloads, everyone's talking about, you can download a 4K. A 4K video or feature-length film in like 45 seconds.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't do that. I mean, and no one, and quite frankly, anyone who downloads 4K content from their smartphones, I mean,
fact.
Yeah. I mean, this is what me and Pierre were talking about the other day. I mean, the difference between SD and HD and 4K and 8K is the number of pixels you get on a screen, and it improves the definition. Well, I mean, how many pixels do you need on something that big?
Well, how much? I mean, what is the maximum resolution on a phone is not going to be 4K.
Yeah, no.
I mean, 4K means like 4,000 pixels along the narrower dimension, doesn't it?
No, the only way when it starts making a difference is when you put it in VR masks and then you really zoom in on that.
Yeah. Okay, because there's a zoomy aspect. Yeah. Can you zoom in VR?
No, you just
it's just big though, isn't
glasses.
Yeah. Oh, because the scope is big. Okay,
because it's magnified so much, then the more pixels, the better. But that's only then. With the naked eye.
So it's quite a sort of utopian, future-proofing kind of thing. I think we can all agree that you don't currently, whether or not you're just misguided or a twat, as Jamie says.
No, I think it's just bad advertising. I think it's very good advertising, making people believe that they need more than what they actually do.
Oh, that's classic marketing, isn't it?
Well, there is, but this is
trying to drive demand.
Oh, yeah, 100% agree with you. But this is where I think Vodafone are gonna fall down on themselves because they've developed this.
Pierre's dicking about with some bit of equipment in the background. If you wonder where Jamie's so distracted,
trying to fight interference.
Basically, they've got this tiered speed model.
Yeah,
and I think it's a very, very good way to do business because 2 megabits per second, you can probably watch. You can do everything you want if you're one type of user. For instance, my parents, if they're just going to go on social media, they're going to send messages, browse the internet. Great, 2 megabits per second is all you need. If you're someone like me, and I do basic gaming, watch videos on YouTube, and do the odd occasional downloads, probably 10 megabits per second is all I need.
Yep.
And then if you're someone who is an incredibly intensive user, like watches a ridiculous amount of sort of now TV content on the go and
like
plays hardcore.
Have you noticed most cabbies are watching telly while they're waiting for a fare?
That sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's where you need the upper limit. But this is where I think Vodafone will fall down, is because no one knows how much speed you actually need for all of these applications. Like, it's not common knowledge. Like, how many people would turn around and say, "Oh, I need 35 megabits per second because I fancy watching Netflix on my phone." No, if you want to stream Netflix generally says all you need is consistent 5 megabits per second. And so this is where I think Vodafone's strategy might fall down, is no one's aware enough to see the advantage of the tiers and how they could probably drop down the tiers, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
and that's why they make the first one quite expensive.
Yes.
But aren't they? I mean, there's been this thing, slightly bit of a tangent, but there's been this sort of Ofcom drive towards fairness and drive towards transparency and drive towards having to alert people when they're coming to the end of their sort of contract where they're paying for phones, so they don't keep paying over the odds. But one of the reasons that exists is, my understanding is, it's always been endemic to the mobile industry to try and get you to pay for more than you actually need. I've got a good example of this, actually. I got a text. I'm an EE customer. We were talking in recent weeks about good sort of customer engagement and BSS and all that sort of thing. Well, EE knows how much data I use. I'm currently on a SIM-only thing where I get 20 gig of data a month, and I guarantee you I use a quarter of that max. So I got a text from EE yesterday going, "Hi, Scott." At least it knows who I am. At least it's not like some of those press releases we get where it says, "Hi, XXX," or "Hi,
telling you're about to run out."
"Hi, Baceno," or something like that. "Hi, Scott, upgrade to a new SIM-only plan and get a massive 100 gigabytes for only," I won't say the amount. And so they're trying to upsell me to 100 gigabytes when they've got all the data there that shows that I use about 5 gig a month. Why would I want to pay extra for an extra 80 gig when I don't even use the 20 I got? Anyway, that's another little point about that. And I think, I take your point, Jamie, about that being ideal, but I don't think Vodafone would view that as a problem if people bought the most expensive one when they don't necessarily need it.
Yeah, I think it will become a problem, because if people don't understand the benefit of these tiers, they're just going to stick with what they know, and what they know is, I'm going to pay for 5 gigabits a month.
I see.
So I think if you're going to attract people to this new concept of selling connectivity, because it is completely new.
Yeah.
Speed tiers is, although it's not new in terms of like the whole industry, it's brand new for the UK.
Yeah.
And people aren't going to understand
culturally there'll be
why
a bit of
they need
adjustment.
it. Yeah. So I think if they're going to justify this, they're going to have to put up some massive advertising campaigns saying, did you know to use WhatsApp you only need a maximum speed of 1 megabit per second, or to use Netflix they need to actually tell people to run these applications. These are the minimum speeds or the maximum speeds or the ideal speeds that you need, because let's be honest, like to run Facebook, how many megabits per second consistent connection do you reckon you need?
Oh, very little. I mean, you just need little bursts of data. I suppose, even the streaming video, I think, is like preloaded on Facebook servers.
But do you know a
No,
number?
I don't have a number.
Well, that's it. And we're...
Sorry, that was your point.
Yeah.
I was going off on a stupid tangent there.
But we're technology journalists, and we don't know. So Joe Blogs on the street isn't going to have a bloody clue at all, is it? So, yeah. So this is where they could massively fall down. But I think it's a really, really good idea.
All right, Ian, you were there too. Were your takeaways similar to Jamie?
Yeah, that was the headline thing, I suppose, is the speed tiers and the fact that it's unlimited, because I think it's always been sold with a, like you were saying, you've got an 8 gigabyte a month bundle before, and if you run out, they phone you up and say you need some more, so pick 20 gigabytes. So they've moved to use as much as you want. They need to find a different way of pricing it, I suppose, and therefore why not do it on the basis of speed and just give people as much as they want. The other thing that struck me is it's pretty aggressive pricing, and some of the analysts that I was talking to there sort of agreed on that it's the rates, even the top rate, £30 a month. I know it's SIM only, but it's not a lot more than you're paying on a, considering that you're going to be getting what Scott Petty said he reckons probably about 100 megabits per second on average on a 5G connection.
I'd say it's very good.
When it's available, obviously, and then as much data as you want. So it's a pretty aggressive pricing strategy.
The eSIM only offer that I was just referring to was barely less than that.
And it's kind of like a few analysts actually said they've kind of got their act together. Like for a long time, Vodafone UK was doing quite badly in the UK market. It was lagging. It was struggling.
And they had their software failure a few years ago.
They had software failures. They've kind of got a fairly capable CEO in, I think, Nick Jeffrey, who's done quite a good job of turning things around, and they've done a good job on the marketing front, and they're now sort of, it's a very sort of challenger mindset, what they've done.
Right.
It kind of really takes the wind out of 3 sales, actually, I think.
Well, they're only the third biggest by subscriber count in the UK, behind O2 and E.
They are, but this is, that's a position they've lost in the last few years, isn't it? They used to be a bigger player.
They used to be number one.
They used to be number one, and they've fallen down, but they're a long-established player. They're not,
of course,
and they're part of a big group, obviously, so they're not the typical sort of Iliad or whoever it is coming along trying to be disruptive.
I spoke to Nick Jeffrey, this was last year, and he turned around and he said about 5 years ago they were market leader and they were number one.
Yeah.
And then he said, I can't remember exactly what he said, but this was about the time where they sort of took their foot off the gas, and you saw the big, massive branding campaigns, so big marketing pushes, like they were. They sponsored one of the rugby teams on the shirts for a while, and really expensive,
and cricket as well,
and cricket, really expensive, high profile
Formula One.
No, but that was group level, wasn't it? Because it'd be a global asset.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, what happened over the last 4 or 5 years, and what have they corrected over the last 2 or 3 years, is their IT systems were terrible, their customer service was awful, and their network wasn't very good. So that's what he pointed to this week. He said, this is what Scott Petty was talking about on stage. He said, we've had a complete overhaul of the IT systems, and they're retiring a further 9 legacy IT systems this year. He said their network was shoddy, and then they basically had a complete overhaul and created, Redstream, their converged mobile and backhaul network, mobile and fixed network.
Yeah.
And then it turned around and said customer service. They've introduced Toby. They brought back 2,500 jobs to the UK. They've completely revolutionised how they do anything. And what I didn't realise is when Nick said this week, this is the first time in 5 years that the UK business is in year-on-year growth financially.
Okay.
So they're turning. They're turning it
Is that
around.
revenues?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not convinced by that. I mean, their statements show revenues down quite sharply, but they blame it a lot on sort of handset leasing costs.
What they're trying to make out is like one off.
Well, it's usually sort of financial engineering. It's how you look at these things, but their revenues are kind of down 5% in the last quarter. Their earnings are up a lot, but that's mainly because they've been cutting loads of jobs in the UK.
Right.
And they cut
so
about
by earnings, we're more
talked about bringing
profitability.
jobs back, but they've cut about 12% of jobs last year, I think. The UK business. I think a lot of that is due to Toby coming in.
Which is their AI.
This is this AI-based sort of
thing.
customer service thing.
But if you have a look at if you have a look at their SIM only plan, I mean that for me says they're trying to continue momentum away from the subsidised. Like you said, they're making more profits because they're getting away from subsidised handsets.
Yeah,
Their SIM only proposition looks a lot more attractive than their 5G proposition with a handset. So it looks like they're trying to gear people towards, bring your own handsets and sort of go to SIM-only plans.
Well, back when I was a smartphone analyst, the briefings we used to have, there used to be lots of bitching and moaning from operators about the amount. They talk about how much they were sending to Cupertino, i.e. to Apple. But there'd be lots of moaning about the amount of money they felt they were spending to subsidise these handsets. I never quite understood that because obviously you pay as a consumer. But I guess they just didn't like the sheer amounts of wedge they're having to send over to Apple and Samsung or whatever to stock all these things. But I just always thought, what are you moaning about? The reason you do it is that there are a carrot there to lure in people to 2-year contracts, which is what you want. You want these post-paid, fat, predictable contracts.
Well, if other people are offering them and everybody jumps ship and goes to that operator, then you lose business.
Well, there's that as well. So you can't afford to not be involved.
Yeah. But the problem is that it's ultimately a no gain for everyone if trends carry on, because you're always going to have the same devices on every provider, and everyone's going to be constantly undercutting each other.
Yeah. So you get that race to the bottom.
You can have that race to the bottom, and all of a sudden you're exposed by in this for 5G phones. You're going to be exposed with 950 quid to Samsung. Is it? How much are those devices? Apple's going to be north of $1,000 by the time that they bring out their 5G device. Like if
it is now, isn't it?
If the thingamabob was what's the latest one?
X.
If the XS is
in excess.
How much is the XS?
I think it's still £999.
If that's £999, what you're going to probably charge another 10 to 15% premium on a 5G phone.
Yeah.
So I mean, do the operators want to be exposed that much when there's so much undercutting going on data bundles, and especially considering you probably have to add, I don't know, 5% premium onto Apple to sell their handsets. Plus, you've got to wear the expenses of customer services. All the other stuff that is associated with being the front end of the customer relationship. So I just don't think I can see why people want to get away from it, and I can see why Vodafone are trying to make these SIM-only contracts really, really attractive.
No, totally. And furthermore, if their differentiator is a different contract, then all the more reasons to distance yourself from any other incentives. You're just saying, look, man, do it whatever way, but just go with us because we've got a better deal for you.
Yeah.
By the way, I confirm that, Pierre. Apple's asking for $999 for.
Yeah. I love how they advertise $749 if you trade in.
Yeah,
that's the first thing you see, and then if you don't, it's $1,000.
and that's probably with about 1 byte of storage.
No, it's 64 minimum.
All right, I'll let you off.
Which is
anyway, more on Apple later.
Yeah.
Iain, there is one other thing which I'm going to. Sorry,
one thing that I thought was very interesting as well about these, and this is something me and Pierre were talking about, and I don't know if you picked up what Scott was saying towards the end when we had our little mini briefing, is that these contracts have been designed with X number of devices in mind. So, data bundles, data allocations are designed with you simply just using your smartphone on your tariff. But if you've got other devices hooked up to your tariff, you're going to be having X amount of consumption coming from your smartphone, all that sort of thing. So you said 5G is more about, X amount of devices attached to a tariff as opposed to a single device.
I see.
Yeah,
So that builds the case for having
SIM only.
unlimited, but lower speeds. Because if you got your iWatch attached, what's the throughput?
Apple Watch.
Yeah, or your Apple Watch. What's the throughput on your Apple Watch going to be?
Yeah, not a lot.
Not a lot. A couple of megabits per second.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. Okay, so but on the whole, I think we all conclude that it was a positive step by Vodafone. So sort of credit where it's due.
Positive step, I suppose, in the short term. I consider them picking up a lot of business because they've been a lot more aggressive than BT, and they've put a lot of pressure on Three to respond. But I think they've kind of dropped any attempt to price it at a premium. So the question is,
it's just a market share grab more than a
profit
grab.
It's potentially a market share grab. And there was questions from analysts and reporters about return on investment in the long run. And, ultimately rivals will respond. They'll have to. Otherwise, they'll end up in the position that Vodafone's been in over the last few years, down at number 3. So
overall, I think that Vodafone have snuck into the lead for me. Because if you look at the creative approach to to pricing, the stuff that they were talking about their network does look promising, because they said they're the highest, they got the highest geographical coverage of all the 4 operators now. What was the other thing? They've lent on the idea of O2 priority with VeryMe, so that's a good, really, really good customer retention. And what was the final thing I was going to say? I can't remember. And the convergence offering. Yeah. They're stealing the idea of BT. We can connect you seamlessly anywhere. They're doing a convergence offer with fixed wireless access and mobile broadbands. And I just think if you combine all those things, overall, it just looks like such a more complete effort at 5G and next gen connectivity than EE.
I've got one more question, sort of related to the ROI on uncapped tariffs. What if they really take off and they're really popular? Isn't one of the reasons why offering uncapped tariffs is not a great idea, that if you've got tons of people using tons of data, then it becomes a network sort of issue?
Well, that's why they keep going on about 5G being such a efficient technology, isn't it? Because you can provision it and have lots of data travelling over the network without having the kind of cost issues that you get with 4G. But
let's see.
Yeah, well, remains to be seen, I suppose. But
I was chatting to, I can never pronounce his surname, Arnaud from France, from Orange today.
Van Paris.
That's the one. And he was said, there are going to be some issues when it comes to congestion, but because you can layer so many different spectrum bands together, that sort of negates the problem.
Yeah.
So you look at when they ready 700 megahertz for 5G.
Yeah.
That's going to improve the coverage. Then all of a sudden you're going up through the centimeter, up through the millimeter waves. And what was he saying? 3.6 to 3.8. There's going to be European auctions on that over the coming months.
Well, there's another UK auction of mid-band next year, I think.
Yeah.
And there's still some countries that have yet to award it. France, I think, still hasn't had an auction. So
the more spectrum you have available, the less of the problem this sort of congestion is going to be. Yeah.
Okay. Iain, before we move off this subject of 5G launches, Deutsche Telekom in Germany made a big announcement this week.
Yeah.
And you and I are arguing the toss about
whether it's available,
the significance of the announcement. But before I get into that, why don't you just highlight what they announced?
Yeah. Well, they've announced a launch of some kind, and as you say, it's either available or not. But even if it is available, it's only in a very small number of areas. Right. It's Berlin and Bonn have been identified as the places that are first going to have services, and then the plan is to kind of introduce it to another four cities. I think.
4? Okay, 6 in total.
Six by, I can't remember what date, but certainly by the end of the year they're talking about having, I think it's 18 months exactly maybe, but by the end of the year they're talking about 300 antennas, which isn't a huge amount.
No.
Considering the kind of I mean, I
Country the
think
size of Germany.
DT's talking about, not DT, BT's talking about 1,500, I think, by the end of the year, and its site footprint's about 19,000. Germany, Deutsche Telekom, are talking about 28,000 sites and 300 antennas by the end of the year. So it's a pretty limited rollout.
But they decided. So the interesting thing for me, they decided to make a big announcement. They had a launch event, but it coincided with Vodafone, so you were forced to choose, and we didn't feel like schlepping over to Berlin and all that sort of thing. That was where it was, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think it was all in German anyway. So
right, okay.
There was always going to be an issue if you don't speak German, which I don't. So
nor do I. About the only time I'll put up with that is at a Rammstein concert, but that's not matter.
Yeah.
But I just thought, we were going over. We're basically discussing, launches, and specifically the concept of soft launch versus hard launch. So this is something that used to come up quite a lot back when I was covering more the tech hardware sector. You get like someone would have a launch event for a new graphics card, for example, but we would always deride it as a soft launch if you couldn't get hold of that graphics card straight away. So, and this is something the marketing industry does quite a lot. They go, ta-da, look at this. And you go, right, can I have one? And they went, nah, it's not available for 6 months. And then you sort of think, well, then why didn't you shut up for another 6 months?
Yeah.
Why are you going on about it now? Now, my understanding of this Vodafone launch that you two went to is that in some you can get hold of a Samsung Galaxy S10 5G.
Yeah.
And there will be some sites. You what?
A Xiaomi.
Yeah. Or was it Oppo?
No,
Xiaomi.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep naming other things so you can correct me.
Yeah.
It'll be a really boring pod.
We saw that phone in Italy, remember? In Rome?
Right, yeah, we did.
Gabe's got one.
Yeah,
Gabe's got the
That's
OnePlus.
Oh, has he got OnePlus? Oh, right.
Oh, it's OnePlus, is it? Yeah.
but my understanding is with one of these phones, you can now, in some limited locations, get on a Vodafone 5G network.
Yeah.
But my reading of the Deutsche Telekom press release, and maybe I'm sort of hypersensitive to these sort of soft launch things, but they were talking about commencing build out, there was lots of sort of aspirational talk, but the impression I got is that there aren't any live 5G networks yet, which made me feel like it was a very soft launch.
I didn't take it that way, but I mean it's certainly very limited.
And I also, I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether I feel that's an issue at all, really, because the UK people were saying that 12 months ago. It's just Germany's really slow.
Yeah, but one point is you go to like the EE launch event or the Vodafone launch event, and you like to feel that there is something tangibly launched. There is a thing.
Yeah.
Whereas all DT seemed to be launching was a concept.
But there's also a lot of talk about rollout of those launch events as well.
Yeah. So they're only very early stage.
I think Vodafone's is in 7 cities, Jamie, at the moment?
Yeah,
and 19
like
by the end of the year. And
something like that.
BT's similar. I can't remember the exact data. I mean, Vodafone hasn't said anything about sites. That's one
it's obviously still very early stage. But for me, the distinction between
the
distinction between hard launch, soft launch in this context is, can you get any commercial 5G anywhere? Is much more of a hard launch than just saying you're definitely.
We'd have to phone them up, wouldn't we, and actually put them on the spot.
We could, but I was thinking of bringing my laptop in to pick over the press release, but it seems very clear from the press release to me that you can't. We're even flogging 5G handsets, and with the caveat that you will get on 5G as soon as it's ready. Which I
didn't see that. I mean, I took it the other way, but anyway. If it is available, if it's not, it's very. They're not going to say something like this without it becoming available, obviously imminently. And
we'll see. I'm going to keep an eye on that. If they don't switch it on for another few months,
because they've already announced tariffs and a phone.
I think, but that's the thing. I think they were just feeling the pressure. I think they're seeing like Vodafone launching in the UK.
Well, Vodafone's due to launch in Germany because they talked about roaming deals that are going to be introduced, and they specifically called out Germany, Italy, and Spain as markets where you will be able to benefit from a 5G roaming service before very long.
So I just think they're feeling the pressure a little bit, and for whatever reason, and I know the CEO of DT whinges about this a lot.
They are under some pressure and maybe this is one of the reasons, they are under some pressure to meet coverage obligations, because despite having been, they feel like they've been fleeced in the 5G auction. They feel that it was structured in a way that drove up costs, and they've spent a lot more than they were expecting to, and more than analysts expected to, I think, before the whole thing started. But at the same time, the German regulators got fairly stringent coverage obligations, and I think the operators have tried to challenge those in court, and that was rejected earlier this year. And there's talk of another legal challenge, but I think the regulator's talking about 98% of the country being covered within the next 3 or 4 years or something. So
there's a lot of moaning from German operators, especially DT, about the burden of regulation.
Exactly, and they keep mentioning actually the amount we've spent, which I think in DT's case is about 2.2 billion euros on spectrum. They sort of translate that into how many sites this means we can't build. Because we had to spend all this money on spectrum. I don't think that's the first time that narrative's come out after an auction. But they've got specific figures of like, this would be 50,000 sites or something.
Which we can't do. Happy now.
Yeah.
All right.
That dates back to the argument of China, though, isn't it? Because they said their argument is, they give their spectrum away for free, so operators can have all of their capex budget to spend on network deployments. Now, whether they spend all of that money on network deployments or they push earnings per share up a bit and dividends up a bit remains to be seen.
And how much of that profit those operators make gets rinsed by the Communist parties, another matter as well.
It's something that like our friends at Ericsson keep sort of pushing that as well, that they should do away with kind of costly spectrum auctions and have sort of beauty style, which they do in Scandinavia, I think. So it works out that your fees are a lot less, but then you actually have coverage obligations that are quite rigorous, and you have to meet them, otherwise you lose your license, basically.
So it's an auction of promises rather than money.
Yeah, but the money does go into network rollout, and I suspect in China there's probably some, the Communist Party is going to come along and kind of give you a kick up the arse unless you actually get your act together and build,
at the very
build
least,
this thing in
I
Beijing.
imagine.
But
I think they're trying to do the same thing with the UK, though, aren't they? With
there are
with
obligations, I'm sure.
They're giving you a discount if you meet certain heightened coverage obligations.
Yeah, and it all gets a little bit politicised, and the odd politician gets to grandstand about how they want to be able to.
One thing I find interesting about the
schools
DT
at the top
thing,
of Ben Nevis,
which didn't come up much in the announcement they had this week, but certainly when they started talking about 5G rollout plans in October last year, they had a big event where they were talking about how many sites they were going to build and what the capital expenditure burden was going to be and how much optical fibre they needed. And they talked quite a lot, and on earnings calls as well, about site densification. So they have about 28,000 sites at the moment in Germany, and Hertges, who's the CEO, has said to actually cover the whole of Germany with 5G, we probably need about 50,000.
Right.
And they're actually building new sites every year. They have, at first it's actually, it's for 4G. It's sort of trying to improve 4G coverage in rural areas, but it does fit into a kind of longer term 5G strategy where eventually you'll need to have a kind of denser site footprint to provide services. I know something Jamie's been looking into quite a bit is densification, because the UK operators are very, very kind of quiet on that. You try and get anything out of them.
Indeed, as Jamie has found.
There's not a lot from them on it at all.
I'm not going to, that is a really interesting subject, but I'm not going to permit that tangent right now because we've been doing this subject for ages. We're not going to fit in anything else if I don't move it along.
Move it on then.
But we'll make a little mental note to bring that up. Okay, Huawei. So we were wondering whether or not Trump and Xi, shut up, Iain, we're going to thrash anything out. And in the end, all they really managed was a minor concession from Trump that Huawei's still allowed to buy some stuff that's not on some sort of arbitrary national security warning list off UK suppliers. Obviously, there's some components that Huawei is going to find difficult to find from non-US suppliers. Now, the purpose for this concession seemed to be twofold. One was that presumably quite a lot of US industry has been going, look, Don, this is really hurting us, mate. I know you're trying to win this trade war, but throw us a frickin' bone here. And so he's done that. But perhaps the more significant one is the sort of broader horse trading and face saving. Everyone has to be seen to be being in the lead, but you've got to make some concessions, otherwise you don't get anywhere. So they make these relatively token concessions, and that was him making a token concession, which he presumably expected some kind of minor reciprocation from China, and that's how it all goes. So, that was a thing there. But, Jamie, I think you've written one or two things along the lines of even that little concession, and I felt it was quite a small concession, perhaps smaller than you feel, that Trump made. It has has met with quite a lot of resistance in the US.
Well, I think it's quite a large concession because, I mean, ultimately, this is what has kicked off all the massive problems at Huawei. Realistically, there are certain components that it cannot get anywhere else in the world. And, they put out a forecast the other day that's not only because of their supply demand, but the reputation damage that has come from all this saga. What are they predicting? 40 to 60% decline in shipments over the second half of the year.
This is smartphones.
Smartphones, I mean, that's massive. But you look at the actual supply chain, and there are certain things which they can replicate through this Made in China 2025 strategy, and they can move into the domestic market. But there are certain things that they can't. So high silicon, their sort of like subsidiary, their semiconductor subsidiary, can manufacture a lot of chips. But there's certain things that you can't do, like, it works with Qorvo because of the radio frequency chips that it does, and it works with some other ones for, I don't know, various other.
Yeah, there'll be so many little bits and bobs.
So many really specific. But this, China isn't good at that.
Or good enough.
Or good enough, and that's why it has to work with the likes of Xilinx and Qorvo and Neophotonics.
A lot of the optical guys in the US are very specialist, and there's not
very
specialist. Yeah.
So this is where I think it is a massive concession, but ultimately, he doesn't have the power to do that anymore. Trump has signed something into legislation, and he can't just turn around. There's a separation of power in the US. You've got the courts, you've got Congress, and you've got the White House. He cannot turn around and say, we're not doing that anymore. Separation of power means he has to go through Congress to get approval. And Congress turned around last year when he tried to do exactly the same thing to ZTE, and they just went, no, we're not doing that. And they just said, no, we're blocking you. And that's what almost sent them to extinction. And then you've got Rubio and Schumer now, who are saying that they want to block it once again. So, I mean, I'm how much they actually believe the national security angle. I think it's political pragmatism and opportunism.
Yeah, definitely. Because I've got something to say about the national security side of it. So I understand no incoming from, if we assume their worst characterization of Huawei as a security threat, then no incoming gear from Huawei into the US. I get that. I still don't get why it's a national security threat for US companies to flog gear to Huawei. Because there's nothing incoming. I mean, maybe they think that some gear, I don't know, might get hacked into, and then they might be able to access networks or reverse engineer or something like that. But it strikes me that an export ban, a ban of US companies selling to Huawei, is a much more part of the geopolitical game, an attempt to damage Huawei as a proxy for China. Than it is anything to do with security, unless I'm missing something. I
mean, it ties more in with the kind of trade, breaching trade sanctions in Iran type thing. And that's certainly not how they've justified it, because the whole thing's rolling on, and that's what the case against the CFO, who's currently sort of still in Canada, as far as I understand, awaiting possible extradition to the US for trial. But that whole thing's about this sort of trade issue in Iran, and whether they did sort of flog gear in Iran in breach of trade sanctions. Now then there's
which was the main thing they did ZTE for.
A legitimate reason for banning, that's because you've kind of flouted trade rules.
Then it's just punitive.
But that's security. The security thing's been brought up with the entity list. That's sort of the word that gets used on that in the documentation. So I agree with you, it does seem a bit odd.
I don't think anyone genuinely believes it.
No.
I mean, number one, if they do genuinely believe it, I don't think because I think partly because I believe, and I know you are a bit sceptical about this argument, but like what the Vodafone guys turn around and say, you can manage risk on certain part of the network. And I believe that you can manage risk. I don't think there's any way to get rid of the risk whatsoever, but you can manage it better over the dumb parts as opposed to the core. But the US, this is where they're showing their sort of like their sort of like ignorance on technology a little bit, is that they decide the network is one thing and all parts are equal, and they're not equal.
Yeah.
Having the core compromised is obviously a lot more dangerous than having 10% of your access network compromised.
Yeah, and the Americans are just going for this sort of absolutist zero tolerance sort of thing. Actually, this reminds me of another story you wrote this week, Ian, where you'd obviously chatted to people at 3 and at Vodafone about... I
chatted to them at 3.
Okay.
I know I'm preempting you, I know, but
that's all right.
I'll ask the questions.
Well, it was just about the presence of Huawei network. So Huawei, after the Vodafone launch, quickly sent out a press release saying, we're really chuffed to be involved in all this.
Yeah.
But what was it that you spoke to them about
well, because there's still this issue with this, on the security side that they could potentially be banned from UK networks. There's
Absolutely.
Still this government security review that's ongoing that was
leaking.
expected. Well, it did leak, didn't it? And then everybody was expecting something to come out imminently in May, and then the deadline suddenly seems to have now be later in the year, which
such is politics in the UK.
Which is obviously there's a lot going. I think when Jeremy Wright stood up at the Informer event and talked about why there hasn't been a decision yet, he basically said, well, there's quite a lot going on at the moment. We don't have a leader kind of Brexit going on, so you can understand why it's taking time. But I think from Scott Petty got quizzed a little bit about it, not by me actually, by the journalists at the press conference. What if a new leader comes in and says you can't use Huawei, and he basically said, and I suppose it's obvious in what they're doing that they think this, because they wouldn't be moving ahead the way they are doing otherwise. But they essentially are working on the assumption that it might get banned from the core, but it's not going to get banned from the kind of dumb radio equipment that goes into it.
Presumably Huawei isn't in the core for Vodafone.
Huawei's not in the core for Vodafone. They use mainly Cisco, I think, in the core. And 3, I managed to get a couple of the tech guys to one side at the event they had earlier in the week, and they pretty much said the same thing. They think it would be really unlikely, very unusual decision. They've had discussions
ban
with...
it from the RAN.
Yeah, and he even said we've been meeting with the NCSC, which is the National Cybersecurity Council, I think, and about this. They've been involved in our procurement process. I mean, they're really dependent on Huawei because they have Huawei is their only 5G RAN vendor, and they actually have used Samsung in the days of 4G. But I didn't know this until earlier in the week, but they're taking all of that out and replacing.
So we suddenly banned them, and they're in all
equipment.
sorts of trouble.
So if you banned them, but then basically, I mean, Scott Petty said, it would slow us down and it would drive up costs and we'd have to go and tear stuff out, which he said before. It's not new, but they're obviously proceeding on the assumption that's not going to happen. It would be a bigger deal for 3 because they're working to launch in, was it 25 cities, Jamie, by the end of the year? 3's talking about?
Yeah, 25 cities.
And that's all Huawei, so...
They launch starting in London in August, and then they want 25 cities. But they haven't actually. So this is where
they haven't named it, have they? Or
well, they haven't named anything to do with mobile yet.
Yeah.
So this is where I think because they've got whoever they've got a relationship with, whoever it is. I don't know. Let's say it's OpenReach. I don't know. So that really doesn't depend too much on Huawei, does it? So. Because all you need is the last mile for their fixed wireless access. So they haven't actually spoken hugely about their radio access network. It's only really the last mile fixed wireless access that's concerning them at the moment, isn't it? Unless I'm misreading.
Well, it's but it's 5G delivered broadband, isn't it, that they want to do?
Yeah, but they haven't actually
service, so they would need the Huawei radio equipment to do that.
Yeah, but they don't have to worry about sort of like backhaul or actual massive cell sites.
Yeah.
If you're just doing the last mile and you're getting, you're working with OpenReach, you get fibre to that point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that much of a screw up if Huawei gets banned out or banned outright.
Yeah, I mean, I think
it'll still hurt them.
It'll
still hurt them.
I think they just think it's not going to happen. So I think that. And the other company, of course, that's pretty reliant on Huawei has launched is BT, and the only company that's actually providing 5G services on BT's network at the moment is Huawei. Nokia doesn't. Nokia is its other radio vendor, but Nokia hasn't launched a 5G service in the UK.
No,
it's all on Huawei kit basically.
I see.
I mean, that's partly because of the way that BT divides the two vendors. So Huawei does everything in urban areas, which are the focus of the 5G launch, and Nokia does stuff in the countryside. But, So again, they haven't spoken to me specifically on this issue recently, but you can just sort of sense from the way they're proceeding that they're not anticipating a radio ban. On the other hand, they are stripping out Huawei, so they've used Huawei in the core network as well, and that's something they're trying to change. They're trying to get rid of it.
Well, this is what you got to. If there's a complete Huawei ban in 2 months' time, what happens? What's going to happen to EE? Because they're not going to get rid of Huawei out of their core within 2 months.
Yeah,
they haven't even gone to proper trials yet. If I'm understanding,
they've started,
but it's still going to take a long
2022,
time.
I think. Yeah,
2022.
Yeah.
So if you ban, if you're saying that Huawei, this is massive threat, and all of a sudden the second largest MNO is using them in their core, then all of a sudden you got to say, well, 3 years, 2.5 years. You've got to get them out quicker than that.
Yeah,
that could really screw them
maybe
over.
that'll be it though. They'd give them.
I think there's a good chance they come along and say Huawei's allowed in radio networks, but you're not allowed to use it in the core, which is basically what the when there was a leak of information, that was what everybody was saying was going to happen. Yeah. And then there was a sense that maybe they'd become tougher because there was some pressure from the US.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I think that's probably what they'll try and do.
It'll depend how much.
And they'll probably
Trump
say to
throws
BT,
toys out
you've
the
got to
pram.
get it out within this period of time.
I imagine what I think the most sensible solution is literally to say to all the MNOs, but this my idea or my take on it would screw through a little bit. You can use Huawei, but no single vendor can account for more than 40% of any part of the network. So it forces you to enter into agreements with a variety of vendors.
Yeah.
So if someone does screw up, you've at least got the processes in place that you can, you have got a relationship with, any of the major vendors. So if you do all of a sudden need to rip and replace and scale back on a certain one, you can do that from day one, as opposed to having to go through the negotiation and the tender period.
And that would be a massive issue for 3 because they're pretty much all Huawei on the radio side now.
Do you know who O2's vendors are?
No, you know them better than I do. They're ones that are a bit mysterious to me.
Primarily, they don't use Huawei.
I was going to say, is there anyone that's Huawei
Is
free?
it Nokia mainly, O2?
Nokia and Ericsson. I can't remember what the actual split is there.
Right.
They have told me before.
So my point is, if O2's Huawei free, and some quite draconian call gets made, that puts them in quite a strong position, doesn't it?
Yeah.
At least in the short term.
Gabriel...
Well, I don't know. Don't forget they're still miles away from a 5G launch full stop.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it'll help them catch up a bit.
2019, yeah.
Yeah, what's taking them so long, man? Do we know? They're just dragging their feet.
Maybe they don't see the need.
They've just got no cash.
Well, they're doing pretty well, aren't they? They're the market leader. They're the ones.
I know
who are
by
out
subscriber count they are, but Telefonica's always skint, isn't it?
No,
the UK business is doing well though.
Incredibly profitable in the UK.
Yeah.
All right.
And their capex percentage to total revenues is above industry average.
Okay.
You're looking at 13-14%.
So as you say, maybe they just don't see what the hurry is.
Yeah, I think it's more along those lines.
Or maybe Ian, they just don't want to do a soft launch.
It's better to be good than fast, isn't it?
Quite.
Yeah, is that 3's line or something? I don't know.
Better to be best than first.
Something like that.
Yeah.
In fact, that's quite a good segue because that's also a philosophy of Apple's. And we haven't got much time, so we'll do this one quite quickly. But basically, Apple, their head of design for years and years has been this English bloke called Johnny Ive. And
he should be in a rock band.
Johnny Ive.
Yeah.
Is this because John 5 from Marilyn Manson?
That'd be it. That's what you're thinking of, isn't it, Ian?
Must have been.
Johnny Ive and the smartphones. Anyway, and yeah, he's kind of he's supposed to be the sort of design guru behind things like the iPhone. And yeah, to be honest, sometimes you get tech journalists talk about Apple devices and talk about how beautiful they are. I think that's slightly overdoing it. It's a goddamn rectangle with a screen on it.
Well, they used to look good when they first appeared, I think, but everybody's caught up with
beautiful,
them, haven't they?
What we're going to put them next to Mona Lisa and go, well, I don't know.
That's tech people, though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. But, allowing for this kind of gushing hyperbole, they're obviously well designed, just like the roundness of the edges, that the finish of iPhones does always look very professional and premium.
But is that, as a designer, what is he responsible for? Is he responsible for the sort of graphical look of it and the way
I think he oversees everything. So yes, you're right. There's the GUI and the interface and the actual sort of technological interface, and then I think there's the actual industrial design. He's presumably got other sub-gurus that particularly specialise in one area or the other. But he was always the man, he was always the figurehead for the design side of things. And, he announced he's leaving. And that led to sort of some narrative along the lines of, is he leaving? I think New York Times, Wall Street Journal, one of the big US papers, wrote a piece going, he's leaving because he's got the arsehole with Apple under Tim Cook, who's a much more process-driven supply chain logistics kind of guy. He's very efficient, obviously made Apple or was a major contributor in Apple being the obscenely profitable company that it is now. And that Johnny Ive just sort of thought, we're not really innovating anymore. And then Tim Cook came out and actually sent an email to NBC going, that's all bullshit. There's no truth in all of that, without actually refuting anything specifically. So anyway, all I want to say to finish off, and I might throw it to Pierre first. He doesn't get past the ball very often. But Pierre, you're famously an iPhone owner. Do you think Apple, over the last, let's say, 5 years, or certainly since Steve Jobs died, has been less innovative?
No, not really. I mean, there's set trends on some things, whether you like it or not. Like, the notch was one thing, like people hated it, but then everybody else did it. Yeah. So there was some design decisions that was replicated, they were replicated everywhere. But then there was some really, I think, big mistakes where, we have to make the things as thin as possible.
Yeah. Bit of an obsession with thinness.
Reducing the battery life, and, the keyboards have been a huge issue on all the Mac Pros. Pros.
What's wrong with the keyboards?
They don't have travel, so there's no feedback.
Oh, you hardly press down.
Yeah.
So it's almost like using a touch screen.
And some have failed completely with just a bit of dust.
Okay, so they're too fragile.
They had to return like loads of,
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Some people were like, I'm switching to a PC just because it has a decent keyboard.
Even Joe Rogan's moaned about that, hasn't he?
Yeah. So it's like, where function is put second, and then beauty is first.
Right.
That's kind of
and thinness.
It's funny because I read a book.
It's a bit fat shaming, if you ask me.
Read a book a few years ago about Steve Jobs, and I guess a lot of Johnny Ive's. They've obviously worked in harmony together, and he would have recruited him because he saw a kind of kindred spirit, I guess.
Indeed.
But the book was all about Jobs' sort of principles of simplicity and how everything had to be pared back to and even in terms of marketing,
like clean geometry and that sort of thing.
Clean geometry, but not. One thing that they were really critical of, I think, when they first went into the phone market was all this. Nokia had the 9120 and the 8640.
Yeah. I don't think they had a point.
And I kind of feel they've moved a little bit away from that since Jobs died.
Because there's a few more phones.
It's not. I mean, it's not that extreme. But once you start getting into the iPhone X and then what's going to come next? I don't know.
I mean, my big issue with the whole thing is that I to be honest, I disagree with you a bit, Pierre. I think there's been no innovation.
Yeah, no. I mean,
in the industry or with Apple over the last 10 years.
No, I mean, a rectangle is a rectangle.
Yeah. I mean, what's changed over the last 10 years? But I mean, the last genuine bit of innovation was probably taking away the keyboard.
Yeah.
Taking the notch out of it isn't necessarily innovation, but, taking a keyboard, that's a genuine form factor change. Yeah. And, and you look at what Jobs did, he turned around and he said, we're going to get rid of the keyboard. We're going to completely redesign what a laptop is. I'm going to put all music onto a tiny little metal rectangle that you can just wear in your pocket, and you don't have to put cassettes in it.
All of this was before 2010.
But this is all part of the idea of, if you've got an innovator in charge of your business, you will innovate, and if you don't have an innovator in charge of your business, you won't innovate.
Yeah, and you'll be a bit more fast follower. So one of the knocks on Apple, I think the last genuinely sort of paradigm-defining innovation by Apple was the iPad, which when it first came out I was a bit sceptical of. I was like, is it just an oversized iPod Touch?
I thought
but that turned out to be wrong, and we've got far too many of them at home. And it's a really good device. But since then, what have they come out with? They come out with the Apple Watch, which was a follower thing. Plenty of other people have come out with those. I don't personally think, I don't own one, but I don't think they've done anything too amazing with it. I think it's a difficult form factor, difficult category.
It's still the most sold, I think.
It's the most sold,
smartwatch.
but the category itself hasn't really taken
No,
off.
the segment has never taken.
Yeah,
No.
And then the same goes. They're definitely behind the curve when it comes to smart speakers and all that sort of thing. Even though they were quite ahead of the game with Siri and the voice assistant stuff. So you get the impression that they're kind of following a bit more than leading. But one thing I'll say, just to mitigate what I said there, I think we can all agree that the whole industry, since, let's say, the tablets came out, there haven't really been any new categories that have set the world on fire from anyone, have there?
Well, apparently there's a lot of augmented reality stuff coming up.
Yeah. They've been waiting for 5G.
With the new phone,
right.
Yeah.
Well, they've been waiting for. I think the one thing that's going to make a genuine change to this like segment of the industry is the. I mean, we've spoken about it before. New interfaces. When you get gesture control, when you get voice interaction, and AI is actually better than it is now, then you can start to actually change form factor on the phone.
Yeah.
You can't really do much at the moment because
it's
these
got to be big enough
phones,
so that you can interact with your finger.
They're defined by touch, so you can't actually do anything. And this is, I mean, and I just think, I think the most important factor of Apple and them being nothing more than a money-making machine now is I genuinely think leadership of the organisation is probably the most important factor. You look at any business around at the moment, and they're absolutely defined by the guy that's in charge. You look at Oracle; they've got Larry Ellison's at the top, and he's a massive money maker.
Yeah.
Facebook, he might have stolen the idea to start with, but he's an incredibly talented engineer, and he's got a lot of vision. And the Facebook business is sort of starting to come back to that session now. Microsoft, they hired a cloud guru, and their whole business defined by cloud.
He certainly transformed Microsoft, that guy Nadella.
Yeah, and then you go to Apple, and this guy is a supply chain guru, and then all of a sudden they have probably the slickest running, most profitable machine in the world.
Not setting the world on fire.
Reserves.
Oh yeah, they got sick amounts of money.
I wonder how long he'll stay. How long?
Why would they get rid of him though?
Yeah.
I mean,
Cook. You mean?
Yeah.
I mean, why would you get rid of him? They're incredibly profitable.
Well, for the reasons we're discussing, maybe we get to a point. So you're completely right in terms of bottom line. I think one thing that's emblematic of having a supply chain guy is the amount of litigation they've got into, especially with Qualcomm. They're really into just screwing down their supply chain. And if supply chain won't bend the knee, then they'll take them to court. And I was quite pleased that Apple didn't win that one because it struck me. Qualcomm doesn't need me to defend them, but it just struck me as quite heavy-handed by Apple, that whole approach.
But let's be honest. How much foresight do these investors have? 6 months, 12 months.
I guess it depends what position they want to adopt.
Are they going to look 5 years in the future? I'd say most investors in Apple are probably looking at the dividends, the earnings per share, the cash reserves, potential for acquisition, and profitability. And all of those columns are unbelievably attractive when you look at the Apple spreadsheets.
I think to answer the question, and then I'll hand it over to Pierre. I think we're kind of running out of time, but I want to give Pierre a last shout on this because he doesn't normally get it. If Apple starts losing significant amounts of iPhone market share over a long period, or at least over a significant period, that's when people will start to ask questions. We track those. You can have sort of cyclical variations, such as Apple always has a spike in Q4, all that sort of thing. But if it starts, like, let's say if Huawei permanently overtakes it at number 2, and what if someone like Oppo or Xiaomi or something like that permanently overtake it at number 3, that's when people are going to start going, look, Tim, no one's buying iPhones anymore because they're the same bloody thing as you were making 10 years ago. It's time for someone with a few more bright ideas to turn up. That's just one thought.
Yeah. The other thing to take into account there is that Apple is going to try and maintain its premium position. And so it doesn't necessarily matter if it's losing market share because the total number of shipments are going up worldwide, if that makes sense.
And their profitability is still good. No, you're
if their
completely right.
profitability and their handsets and their handset numbers remain the same, although they've taken that off the spreadsheets now, so you can't actually tell exactly how many handsets are selling each quarter.
Which itself is a bit suspicious, if you ask me.
Yeah. Well, I think they're going down. They were going down before they took them off.
Yeah.
It's like when 3D
the whole market
movies
slowed down. So
when 3D movies beat records at the box office, it's because a ticket is, 50% more expensive. So
yes, which is where Apple will make
a
load of money because they've got a load of bloody eye-lifers like this sheep.
Well, so talking about eye-lifers, Pierre, have you always had iPhones?
For a while now, yeah. Since my first one was the iPhone 4, though. I got there late.
Okay. Are you ever tempted to defect to the dark side?
If I did, I would go for the Pixel because I would want the purest Android experience.
But how tempted are you?
I mean, every time
I'm treating you as a barometer of whether Apple's doing a good enough job of keeping people loyal.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I pick my wife's Pixel 3, I'm just like, I almost don't know how to use it. It's crazy.
Right.
So I don't know. Unless
does it seem worse or just unfamiliar?
Unfamiliar, yeah.
Right.
You're totally bought into the ecosystem.
Exactly,
though, aren't
you?
You're totally bought
caged
into the
in,
ecosystem.
yeah.
Your
all the
iTunes.
iMessage and all that stuff.
Yeah, you've got a Mac.
That's
the same with me.
Strongest thing.
Or an iSlave.
But also, the fact that they integrate the hardware and the software really makes their product better.
Yeah, I keep going about Pierre. You got an iPhone as well.
Yeah, but that's because
keep leaving you out, Ian.
It's because he Jobs hated the idea of open, didn't he?
Yeah,
but
it's really
wanted
optimized
to build a closed ecosystem.
Well, that's pretty much their core USP.
Yeah.
Is that you get the whole experience. And
they're having to move away from that a bit now with some of the services stuff they're doing.
Right.
There's making things available on Samsung TVs, that sort of stuff, which would never have been something they did in the past. But
that's just, that's their content, isn't it? So that's
content.
I think that's it. I think the reason they can get away with that is that it's a relatively new area for them.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. It's that culture and that mindset of openness, which will eventually
just
spread
like
throughout the organisation.
Microsoft had to get out of the mindset of selling box software in order to sort of reinvent itself.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, they're all bloody they're all cultists anyway. So.
Yeah.
So, Pierre, any last thoughts on Apple? Are you looking forward to the next iPhone?
I've seen renders of it. It's like kind of the same thing.
Oh, there's already another one on the way.
Kind of the same thing. Well, that kind of sums up what we've just been talking about.
Well, it's coming up to Christmas season, 40. They announced it.
They tend to launch them at the end of September.
September. They'll start the advertising for it over the next 2 months. End of September will be just in time for people to buy for Christmas.
So, Pierre, it will have been 2 years since you last got your iPhone. Isn't it time to get another one?
Not really. No, I usually keep them for 4 years. I mean, the new one is going to have 3 cameras. Okay. And I
3 cameras. I got 4 on mine.
No, you have 3. The fourth one is a flash. I mean, 3.
One on the front as well.
Okay, that's what I meant. 3 in the back, 1 in the front.
All right.
So it'll be 4 cameras. I don't know.
Okay, you don't seem that bothered.
No.
What about you? And you got like an iPhone 1 or
7.
something there. Oh, it's 7.
1.
Okay, it's time for an upgrade.
Yeah, I'm still using it on a 2.5G network.
So isn't it time you upgraded, mate? So I don't cuss you on the podcast.
No.
You can trade
I'm going to stick with this one and I'm going to go SIM only.
Right. And you're just going to sweat that asset until it just keels over.
Yeah. You might want to
still finding it's fine, the battery life's fine, the chip's still...
I never have to borrow your charger or anything.
That's a good point, isn't it?
Or you can pay £30 and replace the battery. You can replace the battery now for £30. And it'll crank it back up, like apparently.
I mean, the battery's all right on it. It's if I'm
the 7
in central London, like looking at it a lot during the day, it tends to run down. But at home,
that's where Scott's supercharger comes in.
Yeah, that's when I need an anchor.
How much battery you got in there now?
55.
Oh, so you're going to be nicking my charger.
It's been switched on since
69%.
Right.
I've had it all
yours
day.
is a whizzy new...
And I play the games 74. On mine as well.
74. Okay, so we're all good. Anyway, we're going off on
I did charge it at the coffee
silly
shop.
Tangent.
Oh, yeah, I haven't charged mine all day.
Okay, on that note, thanks a lot, guys, and thank you for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.